Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Sleepless Tales. I'll save you the preamble. We're halfway through chapter 7, and we're getting pretty close to the end, so I'm just going to start off with it, really. Let's get started. Apart from Frau Eva, Max, and myself, many seekers of a very varied kind were closely, or in a more general way, attached to our circle. Many of them followed particular paths, had chosen special aims, put their faith in specific ideas and duties. They included astrologers, Kabbalists, and a disciple of Count Tolstoy, and all manner of sensitive, shy, vulnerable men, members of new sects, devotees of Indian practices, vegetarians, and so forth. With all these, we had no common spiritual bond, save the respect which each of us accorded the secret ideal of the other. Those who were concerned with man's pursuit of gods and new ideals in the past were closer to us. Their preoccupations often reminded me of those of Pistorius. They brought books with them, translated texts of ancient languages to us, showed us illustrations of ancient symbols and rites, and taught us to see how the whole possession of humanity so far consisted of ideals that emanated from the unconscious soul. Dreams in which humanity groped after the vague notions they had of their future potentialities. Thus, we made our way through this wonderful and thousand-headed throng of the gods of the ancient world up to the dawn of the Christian conversion. We learned about the creeds of solitary saints and the changes of religion among different races. And from everything we collected in this way, we gained a critical understanding of our time in contemporary Europe, which, with prodigious efforts, had created new weapons for mankind, but had ended by falling deep into a financial desolation of the spirit. For it had conquered the whole world, only to lose its own soul in the process. The circle also included believers and adherents of particular hopes and faiths. There were Buddhists who were eager to convert Europe, disciples of Tolstoy and other sects. We, who were more intimate together, felt no anxiety about the shape the future was to take. Every sect, every faith, seemed dead already and of no use. The only duty and destiny we acknowledged was that each one of us should become so completely himself, so utterly faithful to the active seed of nature within him, and live in accordance with it, that the unknown future should find us prepared and ready for whatever it might bring forth. For expressed or unexpressed, this was clear in our minds, that a new birth and a collapse of the present time was imminent and already discernible. Demian often said to me, "What will come is beyond our powers of imagination. The soul of Europe is an animal which lay fettered for an infinitely long time. When it becomes free, its first impulses will not be the most agreeable." By the ways, straight or crooked are unimportant, provided the real need of the soul, which we have so long continually drugged and led on false trails, finally comes to light. Then our day will come. Then we shall be needed, not as leaders or new lawgivers. We shall not survive to see the new laws, but rather as men of goodwill, and, as such, ready to go forth and stand prepared wherever fate may need us. Look how all men are ready to accomplish the incredible once their ideals are threatened. But there is no one there when a new ideal, a new and perhaps dangerous and secret stirring of new life is knocking at the door. We shall be the handful of people who are there ready to move forward. That is why we are branded, as Cain was, to rouse fear and hatred, and drive men out of their unimaginative idle into more dangerous ways. All men who have striven for the progress of humanity, all of them, without exception, were capable and effective only because they were ready to accept their fate. It is true of Moses and Buddha. It is true of Napoleon and Bismarck. What particular movement one serves, what pole one is directed from, are matters outside one's own choice. If Bismarck had understood the Social Democrats and had imposed himself upon them, he would have been a shrewd fellow, but hardly a man of destiny. The same applies to Napoleon, Caesar, Loyola, all of them in fact. They must understand their situation biologically and historically. When the upheavals of the earth's surface cast the creatures of the sea on the land, and land creatures into the sea, the predestined specimens of the various orders were there, ready to follow their destiny and accomplish the new and fantastic, and by making new biological adjustments, were able to save their species from destruction. We do not know whether these were the same specimens who had previously distinguished themselves among their species as staunch, conservative upholders of the status quo, or rather as eccentrics and revolutionaries. But we do know that they were ready and could therefore lead their species into the new phase of evolution. Therefore, we too intend to be ready. Frau Eva was often present during these discussions, but she herself did not join in. She was a listener and an echo of each one of us as we explained our thoughts, full of confidence and understanding. It seemed as if all our ideas emanated from her and went back to her in the end. It was bliss for me to sit close to her, hear her voice sometimes, and share the rich and inspiring atmosphere that surrounded her. She was immediately aware of any unhappiness or new development within me. I gained the impression that the dreams I had at night were inspired by her. I often recounted to her, and she found them comprehensible and natural. They held no mysteries which she could not grasp intuitively. For a time, my dreams followed the pattern of our daytime conversations. I dreamed that the whole world was in turmoil, and that by myself, or with Demian, I was tensely waiting for the fateful moment. The figure of destiny was veiled, but had the features of Frau Eva. To be chosen, or rejected, by her, that was fate. Often enough, she said with a smile, "Your dream is not yet complete, Sinclair. You've forgotten the best part." And then that part would come back to me, and I could not understand how I had come to forget it. At times I was restless and tortured by desire. I thought I could no longer bear to have her near me without taking her in my arms. She soon became aware of this. On one occasion, I absented myself for several days and then returned in a state of distress. She took me aside and said, "You must not give way to desires which you do not believe in. I know what you want. You should, however, be capable of renouncing those desires, nor feel wholly justified in having them. If you are once able to make your request in such a way that you're certain that the fulfillment exists within yourself, then sooner or later, the fulfillment will come. But at present, you are first wishing, then regretting, and full of apprehension. All that must be overcome. Let me tell you a story." And she told me about a youth who had fallen in love with a star. He stood by the sea, and stretched out his arms, and prayed to the star, dreamed of it, made it the object of all of his thoughts. But he knew, or thought he knew, that a star could not be embraced by a mortal being. He considered it to be his fate to love a star without any hope of fulfillment. And on this conception, he founded a poetic philosophy of renunciation, and torment, and silent suffering that would refine and cleanse him. But all of his dreams were directed to the star. Once he stood on the high cliff at night by the sea and contemplated the star and burned with love for it. And in moments of great longing, he leapt into space towards the star. But just as he leapt, the thought flashed through him, "This is impossible." There he lay, on the shore, shattered. He had not understood how to love. If at the moment of jumping, he had possessed a sure and steadfast faith in the fulfillment of his love, he would have soared into the air and had been united with the star. "Love must not entreat," she added, "nor demand. Love must have the power to find its own way, to certainty. Then it ceases merely to be attracted and begins to attract. Your love, Sinclair, is attracted by me. When it begins to attract me, I will come. I will not bestow a gift. I must be won." Another time, she told another story. It concerned a lover whose love was unrequited. He withdrew into his heart and thought his love would consume him. For him, the world seemed lost. He no longer saw the blue heaven and the green forest. The brook no longer murmured. He took no pleasure in the sound of the harp. Nothing mattered any more. And he had become poor and wretched. But his love increased, and he had welcomed ruin and death rather than renounce possession of this beautiful woman with whom he was infatuated. Then he felt that his passion had burned up everything inside him, and he became so strong and magnetic that the beautiful woman was compelled to follow. She came, and he stood with outstretched arms ready to draw her to him. As she stood before him, she was completely transformed, and he saw that he had won back all he had previously lost. She stood before him and surrendered herself to him, and the sky, forest, and stream all moved back towards him in new and resplendent colors, and spoke to him in his own language. And instead of winning a woman, he had won the whole world in his heart, and every star in heaven glowed in him, and joy coursed through his being. He had loved, and by so doing he had found himself. My love for Ava seemed to me to fill my whole life. But every day she looked different. On many occasions, I believed that it was not really just her as a person, whom I yearned for with all my being, but that she existed as an outward symbol of my inner self, and her sole purpose was to lead me more deeply into myself. Things she said often sounded like replies from my unconscious mind to burning questions which tormented me. There were other moments when I sat beside her, I was consumed with sensual desire, and kissed objects which she had touched. And little by little, sensual and transcendental love, reality, and symbol mingled together. As I thought about her in my room at home in triangle absorption, I felt her hand in mine and her lips touching my lips. Or I'd be so conscious of her presence, look into her face, speak with her, and hear her voice, not knowing whether she was real or a dream. I began to realize how one can be so possessed of a lasting and immortal love. I would gain knowledge of a new religion from my reading, and it would give me the same feeling as a kiss from Ava. She stroked my hair and smiled with all her warm affection, and I had the same feeling as when I took a step forward in knowledge of my inner self. Her person embraced everything that was significant and fateful for me. She could be transformed into each one of my thoughts, and each of my thoughts could be transformed into her. I had been apprehensive about the Christian vacation which I spent at my parents' home, because I thought it was bound to be torture and to be away from Ava for 2 whole weeks. But it did not turn out like that. It was wonderful to be at home, and yet, to be able to think of her when I arrived back at the H blank. I stayed away from her for 2 days in order to savor the security and independence from her physical presence. I had dreams, too, in which my union with her was consummated in a symbolic act. She was a star, and I was a star on my way to her, and we met and mutually attracted, remained together, and circled round each other blissfully in all eternity to the accompaniment of the music of spheres. I told her this dream on my first visit on returning. "It is a lovely dream," she said quietly. "Make it true." There was a day in early spring that I have never forgotten. I entered the hall. The window was open, and a sly current of air wafted the heavy scent of hyacinthus through the room. As no one was about, I went upstairs to Max Demian's study. I tapped lightly on the door, as was my custom, and went in without waiting for a reply. The room was dark, and all the curtains were drawn. The door stood open onto a small adjoining room where Max had set up a chemical laboratory. From it came the clear white light of the spring sun, which shone through the rain clouds. I thought that there was no one in, and drew back one of the curtains. Then I saw Max Demian, huddled on a stool by the curtained window, looking strangely different. And it flashed through me that I had already experienced this moment in the past. His arms hung limp, his hands were supported on his knees. His head was slightly bowed over them, and his eyes, though open, were unseeing and dead. His pupils reflected a thin thread of light, as if they were fragments of glass. His livid face was hollow, and expressed nothing but a terrible fixity. He resembled one of those age-old animal masks on a temple gateway. He did not appear to be breathing. Memory took charge. I had seen him looking exactly like that once before, many years ago, when I was a small boy. His eyes had been turned inward in just that way. His hands laid lifeless together. A fly had crawled over his face, and on that occasion, it might have been 6 years before he had looked like this. Old and timeless. No line in his face today showed any change. Overcome with fear, I quietly left the room and hurried downstairs. I met Ava in the hall. She was pale and seemed tired in a way I'd never known her to be before. And just then, a shadow passed over the window, and the white, dazzling sun suddenly vanished. I've been with Max, I whispered gently. Has anything happened? He is asleep or drugged. I don't know which. I saw him look like that once before. You didn't wake him up, did you? She asked quietly. No, he didn't hear me. I left the room straight away. Tell me, Frau Eva, what is wrong with him? Don't worry, Sinclair. Nothing is wrong. He was withdrawn into himself. It will soon pass. She stood up and went out into the garden, although it was beginning to rain. I felt that she did not want me to accompany her, so I walked up and down the hall, inhaled the overpowering scent of the acanthus, and stared at the bird picture above the door, and breathed the strange atmosphere of oppressiveness which filled the house that morning. What was it? What had happened? Frau Eva returned before long, and beads of rain were suspended in her dark hair. She sat down in her armchair. She seemed weary. I approached her, and bent over her head and kissed the raindrops out of her hair. Her eyes were bright and calm, but the drops tasted like tears. Shall I have a look at him? I whispered. She gave me a weak smile. Don't be a child, Sinclair, she admonished, as if she was trying to break a spell in herself. Go off now, and come back later. I can't talk to you just now. I hurriedly left the house and town, and walked in the direction of the mountains with the fine rain slanting against me. Low clouds swept by, as if they were weighed down with fear. Near the ground, there was hardly a breath of wind, but a storm seemed to be blowing in higher altitudes. Several times, the sun, white and dazzling, momentarily broke through the rifts in the steely clouds. Then, a more attractive yellow cloud passed over the sky, piled itself against the other gray bank of clouds, and then, within a few seconds, the wind fashioned a shape out of the yellow and blue-gray mass. A gigantic bird that tore itself free from the steel-blue chaos and flew off into the sky with great beats of its wings. Then, a storm became audible, and a mixture of hail and rain settled down. There was a brief, unbelievable, and terrifying crack of thunder over the rain-lashed landscape, and immediately afterwards, a gleam of sunshine burst through. And on the nearby mountains, the pale snow shone livid and unreal above the brown forest. When hours later I returned wet, through and buffeted by the wind, Demian himself opened the door to me. He took me up to his room. A gas jet was burning in the laboratory, and papers were strewn about the floor. He had evidently been working. Sit down, he invited. You must be exhausted. It was a ghastly storm. It must have been hard going for you out there. There's some tea coming up. There's something odd about you today, I began hesitantly. It isn't only this bit of a storm. He gave me a searching look. Did you see anything? Yes, I saw a picture in the clouds, quite clearly for a moment. What kind of picture? A bird. The sparrowhawk, was it? The bird of your dreams. Yes, it was my sparrowhawk, huge and yellow, and it flew off into the steel blue sky. Demian heaved a great sigh. There was a knock. The old servant maid brought in tea. Help yourself, Sinclair. I don't believe it was just chance that you saw the bird. Chance? Does one see things like that by chance? Quite right. No, it means something. Do you know what? No. I only feel that it portends on a world of convulsion of some kind. A move on the part of destiny. Something I believe concerns us all. He paced up and down. A move on the part of destiny, he shouted. I dreamed the same thing last night, and Mother had a premonition yesterday which conveyed the same message. I dreamed I was climbing up a ladder placed against a tree trunk or tower. When I reached the top, I saw the whole landscape ablaze. A vast plain with its towns and villages. I can't remember it all, but it is still somewhat confused. Does the dream have any special message for you? I asked. Of course, no one dreams anything that doesn't concern himself, but it doesn't only concern me. You're quite right. I am pretty accurate in separating the dreams which affect my own soul from the others, rare and all conscious, in which the whole destiny of the human race is involved. I've rarely had such dreams before, and never before this one, of which I could say that it was a prophecy which was fulfilled. The interpretations are too uncertain, but I know for sure that I've dreamed something that doesn't concern me alone. The dream is linked up with other previous dreams I've had in which it continues. It was those dreams which caused the forebodings I spoke to you about before, that our world is desperately indolent. We know, but that would be insufficient reason to prophesy its destruction. But for several years, I have dreamed dreams which make me feel that the collapse of an old world is imminent. At first, these were vague, remote presentiments, but they have become increasingly strong and unambiguous. I still know nothing more except that something is going to happen on a vast scale, something terrible in which I personally shall be involved. Sinclair, we shall survive whatever this thing is that we have discussed so often. The world will be renewed. There's a smell of death in the air. Nothing new arises without death, but it is more terrible than I supposed. I stared at him, aghast. Can't you tell me the rest of your dream? I ventured to ask him. No, he shook his head. The door opened and Frau Eva entered. So you're sitting here together. You're not feeling sad, children, I hope. She looked fresh. All trace of tiredness had vanished. Damien smiled at her, and she had come up to us like a mother approaching her frightened children. Not sad, mother. We have merely been trying to solve the enigma of these new omens. But it doesn't matter. Whatever's to happen will happen suddenly. It will suddenly be there, and then we shall learn whatever we need to know. But I felt depressed, and when I took my leave and walked alone across the hall, the scent of Acanthus seemed faded, insipid, corpse-like. The shadow had fallen over us. And guys, I'm going to finish this in the next part. This will be starting on the final chapter called The Beginning of the End. So you can tell it's a little bit portentous, right? And it's also, it's the beginning of the end. It's also the end of the end, because that's the end of the book. So, guys, one more episode, and you'll be making it. If you're reading this for your homework, congrats on doing your homework, man. I'm really proud of you. If you're listening to this for fun, all good by me. Right on. Anyways, I didn't do the preamble, so this is Sleepless Tales, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, favorite, subscribe, and I'm excited to see you in the next part. Have a great night.